Good morning or afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on D-Link's Introduction to Switching webinar. I'm Carrie Mertz, our Field Marketing Programs Manager for D-Link's Solution Provider channel, and I have Michael Friends, Inside Sales Support, here with us today to present. So welcome, Michael. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So before getting started with the presentation, I'd like to review a couple of important items. First, we are recording this webinar, and it will be available tomorrow for viewing. And there will be a link to the presentation included in the follow-up email that I send out tomorrow about noon. So you can find that recording there. And if you are a D-Link reseller partner, you'll also be able to find that link in the partner portal at partners.dlink.com. Also, all attendees' lines are muted. So if you have a question for Mike, you can enter it in any time during the webinar in the Q&A panel, and we'll be addressing all the questions at the end of the webinar. Also, we'll be giving away some D-Link product today to one lucky attendee. It's a smart managed 8-port gigabit PoE switch, and we'll do a drawing at the end of the webinar, right before the Q&A, and we'll have one lucky winner that will be randomly drawn and announced at that time. And with that, I will hand it over to Mike to start his presentation. So there you go, Mike. You should be able to start your presentation.
Well, Carrie, let me know when you're able to see my screen. I should be sharing it shortly. Can you see my screen, Carrie?
Not yet, but give it just a minute to see if it comes up.
Okay.
Okay, you shared your screen and everything? We don't see it yet, Michael. Yep. Are you good to go? Did you try maybe moving it forward to see if it's...
Let's try again. I'm not getting...
Okay, we still have a few people joining, so it's good we're giving them a little time to get on. Are you working on it, Mike, there? Is it giving you some issues?
Well, it shows I'm not connected, but hold on here. I'll try to get back on again.
How's it looking?
Carrie, see if you could give me presenters.
Okay. Not yet. Okay, we're close though, right? Did you log back in?
Let me log back in now.
If not, we'll switch to plan B.
All right.
Okay, I see you. Let's try it again.
Let's try again.
Okay, there you go. switch it over to you.
All right. Thanks for being patient, everyone. I've been doing these presentations for years now, and without fail, there's always technical difficulty in the beginning. So I apologize for that. But we'll get started right away.
Yep, we can see your screen, so I think you're good to go.
Oh, great, great. Thank you so much. So I want to sincerely thank everyone for attending today. Everyone has a busy schedule, so D-Link is pleased that you are willing to take out about 45 minutes of your day today to learn about switching and D-Link products. I really appreciate it. So because of the delay, I want to just jump into the agenda as soon as possible. So the definitions that I'll give today are really informal, and it's designed for you to understand the really basic concepts. We will talk about what is a switch, very basic, D-Link switch categories. And D-Link's categories are the categories for D-Link as well as many of our competitors. We'll talk about typical applications for D-Link switches. Where do our switches fit, or where does switching fit? So not only D-Link, but where do switches fit in a solution? We'll talk about PoE and PoE requirements. Now, PoE is always a topic that really gathers attention. PoE is still emerging, and many people have questions on PoE. So feel free to text or ask questions, and we'll address the questions at the end of the presentation. We'll talk about the D-Link switch product line. I'm just going to show you guys that D-Link has switching solutions soup to nuts, and we'll talk about how to pick the right switch. So at the end of this presentation, my goal is for you to know where to go to get the right information. You're not going to remember everything that I present today, but you will know where to go and where to get relevant information. But what is a switch? A switch is basically like a traffic cop. It is that piece of hardware in the middle of the network. It's in the core. It's the core of your infrastructure. So it saves time. You absolutely need a switch in today's environment. So the advantage is it's going to decrease your network congestion and traffic. A switch, even an unmanaged switch, is going to be smarter than any hub. There are uses for hubs time to time, but for the most part, for a network that's less congested, you want to use a switch. You have managed switches, which offers more features, and we'll talk about that quite a bit. And only disadvantage is if you're using layer 3 or some of the high-end switches that have a web interface, you're going to need someone that knows how to configure that web interface. So let's talk about the different categories of the switches. So there's an unmanaged switch. The unmanaged switch just requires no administration. You're going to get the RJ45 ports that looks like kind of like a phone jack, old-fashioned phone jack, but it's a little bit larger, and you just plug in your device, and then it's going to direct traffic. It's a good solution for the desktop level. Our largest unmanaged switch, I believe, is 26 port, and it's the ideal replacement for a hub. It's going to be much smarter than a hub. And then at the high end, you have what's called a managed or fully managed switch. A fully managed switch may need an administrator. It will need someone with technical knowledge to operate the switch, to tell it what to do, tell it what not to do. And layer 3 switches will always have what's called routing. The routing is the ability to talk to different networks on different subnets. So usually a layer 3 switch is going to be at the core or at the center of your network, and it has the ability to control your network. So also what you'll have in many of our switches is PoE, and usually with the layer 3 switching, you'll have a large PoE budget. And we'll talk about PoE and the PoE budget a bit. So you have the high end. We talked a little bit about the high end of the switching. We talked about the low end, the unmanaged switching, where the fully managed switch is going to going to have several commands. It's going to have layer 2, layer 2 plus, and layer 3 abilities. It's going to have more security. It's just going to have a whole list of features. Where the unmanaged switch is just plug and play. You plug in your Cat5, your Cat6 Ethernet cable to your device, and away you go. So what is missing? What you want to see is what's in the middle. And what's in the middle is the smart switch. So the smart switch is going to have layer 2, layer 2 plus, even layer 3 capabilities. It's for dealing, it's always going to be web-based. So you log on to an easy web GUI and you tell the switch what to do. Out of the box, if you just want to plug it in and use it as an unmanaged switch, you can do that also. You can do that with the smart switch, the web-based, or the managed switch. But you want to take advantage of the capabilities. So the smart switch or the web-based switch, that's over 50% of the market. So it's a good opportunity to sell to your customers. Now, what I want you to notice is that at the bottom, to manage most common needs of an application, such as PoE management. For example, if you have a camera or an access point that is acting kind of strange, and you need to turn it off and turn it back on, you could do that with a managed or a web-managed switch. You cannot do that with an unmanaged switch. If you want to control the bandwidth or the width of the highway, if you want to control your VLAN, we're not going to talk a lot about VLANs today, but VLANs is just your virtual local area network. If you want to control your QoS, or quality of service, and remote administration. If you want to be at home and control your switch in the office, you would need some type of web interface to do that, and you won't get that with a unmanaged switch. So with that, we'll talk a little bit about the vocabulary that we'll use. I've mentioned several terms so far that you may or may not be familiar with, but what this slide will do is just cover some of the more common vocabulary. So the bandwidth is just the size of the pipe. SCP is the differentiated service code point. Basically, that's telling you how it's going to handle the traffic. You're putting your traffic in different classes. The speed is important. So look down to the left at Wiley, our friend Wiley, and look to the right there at our friend the Roadrunner. Wiley, he's fast Ethernet. It's been around a long time. The speed there is 10/100 megabits per second. And the Roadrunner, he's gigabit. 1 gigabit equals 1,000 megabits. So it's a factor of 10 faster than fast Ethernet. However, fast Ethernet is still applicable in many, many applications today. So depending on how you qualify your customer or qualify your opportunity, you may sell them fast Ethernet and it will work just fine. But for many of the applications, you do want to offer gigabit as a faster solution, but it depends on how they're using the product. So here's a sample topology. Now, the blue lines are our Cat5 or Cat5e or our Cat6 cabling. So your main switch at in the middle of your network, that's usually called the core or your tier 1 layer. When we're designing networks, you usually want to have a 3-tier topology, but many customers, many companies run on a single tier or 2-tier or 3-tier or 4-tier network. This example is just a 3-tier. So at the core, that symbol represents a layer 3 switch, and that layer 3 switch is usually connected to a router that gets you out to the internet. The next layer is the tier 2, called the aggregation. Sometimes it's called the distribution layer or the tier 2 layer. So it's many switches that feed into the core switch, and those are all also either layer 2 plus or layer 3 switches. The layer 3 means that it has routing. And then at our third tier, that's where we hook in all our devices. So we might have our access points and our cameras and our servers, etc. at the third tier. So when your customer talks about, hey, I need a switch for the edge, or I need a switch for the distribution layer, or I need a switch at my core, then you have an idea what they need. At the core, they usually want routing or tier 3 capabilities. At the edge that talks to their devices, you usually only need a layer 2 switch or a lower end switch to save the customer money. So, but sometimes they may want some static routing at the edge or at the access layer, but you qualify your customer to figure that out. And all that can be connected with your Cat5 or Cat5e or Cat6 cabling. Now, the reason I mentioned the cabling is important. So not only would you sell your customer the switch, you could possibly sell your customer the cabling. Now, I just noted here that, yeah, D-Link does have cables, but that's not the main reason I included this slide. The main reason I included this slide is to show you, if you use Cat5 here, use the Cat5, you'll notice that Cat5 is compatible with fast Ethernet, it's compatible with gigabit, and the distance is 100 meters. Now, 100 meters for us that use the feet, 1 meter is 3.28 feet, so that's approximately 300 feet or so. And that's been a Ethernet standard for, since Ethernet's been around, as long as I can remember. Now, the advantage of going with Cat5e, you'll notice, is that it's going to give you the same distance, but it's a newer standard. The Cat6 cabling, if you sell your customer Cat6 cabling, not only is it backwards compatible, but it will also give you 55 meters if you use a 10 gig Cat5 cabling. So if you sell them Cat6, and for the most part it's not much more than Cat5e, you could actually use 10 gig copper cabling with Cat6 cables. Now let's talk about our categories. With D-Link, we do have the switches soup to nuts. So you'll be familiar with this now. These are the unmanaged switches. The DES are the 10100 switches. And one clue here, if you look at the last two numbers on each designation, that's going to tell you how many ports the switch has. So the 1005 is going to have 5 ports. The P at the end means it's going to have PoE. It may not be all 5 ports for PoE, but the data sheet will tell you whether it's one of the 5 ports has PoE or if all 5 ports have PoE. Just refer to the data sheet for all the details. And then we have the gigabit. These are unmanaged. You just plug in and go. Here it's up to 24 ports. And then we have what's in the middle, the web-based or the smart switches. And they're in different families. We have the 1100 family. You notice to the right is the speed. The DXS are the faster switches up to 10 gig. So it's a factor of 10 faster than the 1 gig. And then we have the 1210 series, and it has 10 gig also, as well as gigabit. And then we have the top end of the web managed, which is the 1510 series. Now, take away this from this slide. For the 1510, even though they're gigabit switches, you could get up to 4 10 gig ports with the 1510 series. Now we have switches that have more than 4 10 gig ports, but those are the DXS part numbers.
Hey, Mike, it looks like we're stuck on the unmanaged switch slide.
Okay. Okay, it should be showing the fully managed slide. Is it showing that yet?
Not that we can see right yet.
Okay, let's see here. All right.
Okay, well that looks better. 1510s I see.
Okay, good.
And now we see your control panel.
Okay, now you should see the fully managed switches.
Yes.
Okay,
perfect.
Good. So now these are the fully managed or switches where you can have the layer 3 or the routing capabilities, and you can see the families here. Our top end family is the 3620 series family, and the new 3630 series of switches. If you need like a 52 port with PoE, you would either consider the 3420 series or the 3620 series, the 3420 or the 3620 family. Now, one thing we do want to look at is we do have tools for you guys. For our partners as well as for our end users, we have what's called the Product Selector Pro, and we have the Product Selector. This is the Product Selector, so anyone can use this. Our end users, our partners, everyone can use the Product Selector. And this is the link to the Product Selector, or, let me see here, you can also get to it from our web page. So I'm going to get to it from here. Now you should see the Product Selector. Now with the Product Selector, you just pick the feature that you need. And anyone can get to this tool. You can get to this tool directly from the link, or if you go to our website, us.dlink.com, you would just go to For Business, you pick Switching. Once you pick Switching, you'll scroll down and you pick the Product Selector. And once you click on Learn More, it's going to take you directly to the Product Selector. And in a nutshell, how the Product Selector works is just a filter. So if you know you only need PoE switches, I'll pick PoE only. And once I pick PoE, the right side is going to filter the field and only show you PoE switches. Now for our partners, the advantage for our partners is that we do offer a product selector that has a few more capabilities. For example, where you can export it to a spreadsheet format, then you can add the other products that you may want to quote to your customer and give the right solution to your customer. Let's get back to the slides here. So that's our product selector. Now, typical applications, you can probably take a guess here. If I'm talking about D-Link and I want to highlight D-Link, I'm going to say, yes, our products fit just about every application. Now, here's an example. With D-Link, we can talk to most folks' IP cameras. We could talk to the workstations. We could talk to the servers. There's large installations where we're using VoIP phones, and there's many installations where we're using the access point. So one example is we've had a successful deployment with a hospital where we've deployed over 200 cameras. We've had another successful deployment at a major East Coast university where we've deployed over 300 of our access points with D-Link switching. So as I mentioned earlier, D-Link is the traffic cop in the middle, and you could have all these products either talking to multiple switches, or you could have it talking to a single network, a single switch. And as you can see from this slide, you can use it with the storage and the routers and the access point and the VoIP phones. So with Fast Ethernet, this is an example where you'll use Fast Ethernet. Most cameras, most of our cameras are 10100. So it's no problem using 10100 with most of our cameras. Now, there are cameras out there that require gigabit. Out in the field, I've seen cameras as fast as 60, maybe 80 megabits per second. Those are usually the 12 megapixel or 20 megapixel cameras. But what you would want to do is size that camera. And usually, whoever's camera, whether it's D-Link or whoever, the data sheet will tell you the throughput required for that device. Now for gigabit, usually when customers mention to me that they're using VoIP, I immediately just default to a gigabit solution. If they're using the 12 or 20 megapixel cameras, I just default to gigabit because the price delta is shrinking. It's still cheaper to go with Fast Ethernet, but the price delta is shrinking, so gigabit is a good solution, especially when you know you don't want the switch to be the bottleneck. That means You don't want the switch to be the slowest part of your network. So let's talk about PoE. This is where I usually get pretty good discussion. Now, this is not going to be an in-depth review of PoE, but our director of switching, Steve Olin, he does an excellent presentation that goes in-depth with PoE, and that presentation is available if you guys would like that presentation, but it just goes through the nuts and bolts. Today, we're not going to go through the nuts and bolts. We're just going to give you a general overview of PoE, Power over Ethernet. So PoE is basically, the way I remember is, it's just data and power going over a single cable, and it follows the standard. So it uses a standard Cat5 cable that we talked about earlier, but it can use Cat6, not a problem, and it just carries the data and the power over the cable. Now, it is a standard. Before PoE was a standard, pre-2003, everyone had their own flavor of PoE. Even today, there are some companies that do not follow the standard. The standard today that has been ratified is 802.3AF and 802.3AT. D-Link follows these standards. And why is that important? If you're using someone else's access point or someone else's camera, if they follow the standard, it will work with our product. Now be careful, because there's some cameras and there's some access points out there that follow their own standard, and they'll tell you, they'll say, okay, we're PoE, but you must use our version of PoE. And that's fine. That means your solution is just with their product. But if you want to mix and match in order to get yourself the best deal and the best price, follow the standard and everything will work end to end. So D-Link follows the 802.3AF and AT standard. 802.3BT is a new standard coming out. So what that's going to do is, instead of being a 15.4 watts or being 4 watts or 7 watts, the BT standard will go up to 30 or even maybe 60 watts. That standard is still being fleshed out. So once the standard is out, we'll know exactly what that standard will entail. So here's an example. So we want to make sure that when we give the customer a switch, that it's going to fit their requirement. So here's an example of a screen that just what a smart switch or a managed switch will give you. So you can log on to the switch, you can see this screen, and then it's going to tell you, how many ports you have. It's going to tell you whether the port is on or off. And you could turn off the port. So if I wanted to say, okay, I want port 8 to be disabled, disabled means it's going to turn that port off, which means it's going to turn the power off. So that camera would turn off, you could turn it back on and basically just reboot whatever device. So with a managed switch, it gives you that capability. Now, the other thing I want you to see is, look at the bottom here. Look at the bottom. It tells you each class. So the class 1 is up to 4 watts, class 2 is 7, on down the line. It tells you the wattage that each class gives you. So you could tell port 1, I want you to be class 1. But you got to be careful. If you plug your camera into port 1 and it requires more than 4 watts, if it tries to use more than 4 watts, ask yourself, what's going to happen to that device? If it says, hey, I need 5 watts, but I'm only allowed to get 4 watts, this is what will happen. The device will power on, but once it needs greater than 4 watts, that device will power off. So what I usually suggest is, hey, just let the switch auto-negotiate its power. Only go and change things if you need to troubleshoot. So let's see if our product fits the requirement. So we talked a little bit about the class. Now, one thing you'll have to look at the data sheet, and the data sheet is going to tell you, it's going to tell you what is the maximum wattage this device takes. So right now you should see where I circled 11.6 watts for this particular camera, a DCS 6517. Now, I picked this camera on purpose because I knew it was a little bit more power hungry. It's close to 12 watts. So in your brain, just say, hey, it's close to 12 watts or so it's going to need 12 watts per camera. It needs that much ready for it. Now, based on the class, this particular camera is a class 0 device, which means it could get up to 15 or so watts. So you want to look at that. So let's look at this. Let's answer this question. So with 3 devices, 3 of those cameras, will the switch fit the requirement? So we're looking at this particular switch here. So we want to look at the total number of PoE ports. Okay, it's 3 ports. 3 cameras, we're going to use 3 ports. Look at the watts supplied by the switch. So that's this here. That's this. You look here, that's 52 watts or your PoE budget. That's your PoE budget. So we said, okay, the number's 12. 12 times 3 is 36. 52 is larger than 36. Plenty of PoE budget. So you have no control with this switch because it's an unmanaged switch. So you got to do your homework beforehand. Once you plug in your device, will it fit the requirement? The answer is absolutely yes, because it fits the requirement up to 15.4 watts per port. The camera only takes 11.6, so we're good. So let's look at the next one. So now we have 10 cameras. We're going to have 10 of the same cameras. 11.6 watts is what it needs. Will this switch fit? So let's look at the switch. The wattage is 370. That's the total PoE budget. You have 10 cameras. How many ports does a camera have? Okay, this one has 26. So it has 24 PoE ports. So how many devices need PoE? 10. What is the max PoE requirements of that device? So it will be 11.6 times 10, so 116. So you calculate the total. Does it fit? Absolutely. So we could use this switch for the solution also. So with that being said, you don't have to do the math. Just let the tool do the math for you. And that's what I do every day, is let the tool do the math for me. So let's go back to our tool. We're back to our product selector. And we have a very nice feature. So up here at the top, you should see PoE Planner. So we click on the PoE Planner. And once we click on the PoE Planner, it's going to take us to a selector. And what the selector does is it lets us pick the product. So we know we used a camera, and we know we used the 6517 camera. And what I'm expecting is for it to tell me that that camera uses 11.6 watts, and that's what I see. So when I change the quantity to the right, I expect the switch to change to a compatible switch. But when I change that, sure enough, you should see right now where we use the DGS 1008P is on the list. And you notice it puts it in the different categories. We have the unmanaged, we have the web smart and the smart switches, all the GUI managed switches, or the unmanaged switch. Now for our other example, if I change this to 10, just ask yourself, should the 1008P remain on the list if I change that number to 10? So in my estimation, it should not remain on the list once I change it to 10. In fact, one of the first switches we should see should be the 1100-26MP. And if you look at the bottom here, it's giving you the summary that includes the number of ports and the total watts used, 116 watts. Carrie, are you able to see the slides now?
We are on the Product Selector. We're on the Product Selector Pro.
It gave me an error, so let me see if I can get back. Okay. Are you back to the slides yet?
Not yet. We seem to be stuck on the tool.
Well, I'm not having good luck today. So let's see here. Shows I'm still connected. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, it shows I'm connected, so let me know when the slide shows back up. It should be back on the agenda. Just let me know when the agenda shows.
Okay. Okay, there's the agenda slide.
Okay, great. I apologize for that. Having network difficulties today. So we have two main bullet points to go over today. I do want to stress this bullet point, and that's the D-Link switch product line. This will help you in a nutshell. With this chart, you can quickly decipher what your customer needs. So you see the D, you see the S. Those are your constants. Those aren't going to change. D stands for D-Link, as you probably could guess, and S stands for switch. And the middle is what changes here. So if you go down here, it's either going to be DGS, D-Link gigabit switch, DES. So for what we talked about earlier, DES is going to be slower, or 10100. We have DSS, that's also 10100. Let me just skip down to the DXS. DXS, X stands for 10 in Roman numerals, so the DXS will be a 10 gig switch for the 1100, 1210, 3400, 3600 families. So it's going to be 10 gig for all those particular switches. And what does that tell you? All the ports will be 10 gigs on that switch, but it can step down if you get the right SFP, small form pluggable appliance. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. So let's go to the middle here. The middle here is the family. So you'll have the family. So for example, if this was DEF 105, it would be a 5-port 10100 switch on down the line. As you go up in family, you go up in capabilities, what the switch can do. And then the last number, if you have the last 2 digits, that's the number of ports. So D-Link has anywhere from 5 ports to 52 ports. And then the last numeral is either going to stand P for PoE or P plus. That just means it has a larger PoE budget. Just refer to the data sheet for details. Or MP, that also means it has a larger PoE budget. PC means PoE and combo port. A combo port is a port that could be either optical or copper or base T. T is base T, so that could be 1,000 base T or 100 base T. That just gives you the speed. TC with base T or combo port, and the last thing is SC. SFP, small form pluggable, which means optical, and then the combo port, which means it could be optical or a base T port, copper. So you could quickly decipher. So for this example, it's in the 1100 family, it has 8 ports and it's PoE. Now with that, these are the SFPs. So the SFP slides into the switch that has SFP or combo ports. So they slide in, and what does it give you? You notice the little orange and yellow, that tells you the distance. So earlier we talked about the copper, the Cat5 and Cat6 has a 100-meter distance. You'll notice this has a much longer distance limitation. So that's why you buy SFPs or buy switches that have the SFP ports, because it'll give you a much longer distance, anywhere from 300 meters on up to 10 kilometers. So here, this gives you a good example of where you'll take the SFP and just slide it into the switch. So you start at the bottom and you just slide it into the switch. You have your optical cable You have the same SFP on the other end or in the other device, and then you could go the longer distance. Now for our last topic, just how to choose the right switch. And I'm just going to give you a couple examples, and we'll let you guys go for today. So we want to choose the right switch based on, do you want to use the switch for wireless? Do you need it for cameras? Do you need it for your database? What do you need the switch for? Now, many companies, they completely separate their cameras and their wireless from their databases and their web servers. Other companies, they have it all running off the same switch. You have that choice. Do you need PoE? If you need PoE, what's the PoE budget that you need? How many ports do you need? So hopefully your customer will know that. If your customer doesn't know that, after this, hopefully you could help that customer figure it out. How many devices you have? Now, what speed do you need? Do you need 10/100? Do you need gigabit? Do you need 10 gig? And probably the most important question is, what's your budget? How much money do you have? Do you need to save money and consider the Web Smart switch? So that takes us back to our product selector tool. And with the product selector, let's go back to pick our switches. It's a very, very smart filtering tool. So we've already talked quite a bit about PoE, so let's do that. Let's just say we need PoE, and let's just say that we know we want it to be a Web Smart switch. So if we do that, and we want it to be smart, PoE and smart, there's our filter. So the customer's going to get a web interface, and they're going to get PoE. You get another customer, and they say, hey, I want to go a long distance, and I know I want gigabit. So if you know they need the optical to go the long distance, you'll pick that, and it's going to tell you right away the switches that have the SFP port. Very, very nice feature. So with this, you just query the tool, use your tools. You tell it what you need, how many ports, the speed, the intelligence, and it figures it out for you. Now with that, that's the main thing, so I'll hand it back over to Carrie, and Carrie will see if anyone has any questions.
Great. All right. Thanks, Mike. Yes, now would be a great time to send questions in. We'll give Mike a chance to catch his breath a little bit, get some questions in, and we'll do our drawing for our winner. And also, the Product Selector Pro is a great tool, so thanks, Mike, for showing us that. I sent out via chat the link on our website to that Product Selector Pro. So check the chat tool if you want to get that. And then I will also include it in the follow-up email that we'll send out tomorrow. So it'll be there too. So thanks, Mike, for that. And then we will do our drawing for our winner right now. I've been looking at our attendees, so thanks everyone again for attending. And I'll randomly draw Chris from Mississippi. That's probably kind of general, but Chris from Mississippi is our winner of our Smart Managed 8-port gigabit PoE switch. So Chris, we will reach out to you after the webinar. And again, thank you everybody for joining us today. And Mike, I'll get into the questions for you. So the first one that came in is, what is the max watts per PoE port?
That is straightforward math with our switches. Within our data sheet, we tell you how many of the ports have PoE, and we tell you the maximum PoE budget. So it's the PoE budget, so for example, 370, divided by the number of PoE ports. And on many of the, it may be a 24-port switch, but 24 of those ports have PoE, then it would be 370 divided by 24, or 370 divided by 28. So on some of our switches, it is 15.4. On some of our switches, it's about 7.7. On some of our switches, you could buy an additional power supply that will boost up that budget. But that's how you figure it out. It is a little bit of math involved.
Okay, great. Another one that came in is, can a layer 3 switch fill the function of a router?
Well, but the definition of routing is just being able to route packets to a different network. So a layer 3 switch, it is a router. Now the difference is with the router that you use to get out on the network, it has a little bit more security built in, where it usually has a feature called NAT, or network address translation, that doesn't put all, so people can't get to your switch from outside your network. So our layer 3 switches, they are full-fledged router. It just depends on the routing protocol that you need, whether it's OSPF or RIP or whatever. It is full-fledged routers, not really designed to go out on the internet unless you go with one of our really high-end switches.
Okay, great. And then another question that came in, does D-Link offer voice over IP handsets?
That's an excellent question. Well, D-Link, we've been around for over 30 years now, and we were in the VoIP market. We were one of the first in the VoIP market. We are no longer in that market. So the customers that did use our VoIP phones, they said they worked great, but unfortunately, we no longer have them.
Okay, great. Next question, will D-Link support AVB protocol?
Could you repeat that, Carrie?
Will D-Link support A, V like Victor, B like boy protocol?
Ah, AVB. Yes, great question. That's one, what we'll do is Carrie usually follows up. That one I don't have the answer to. I mentioned Steve Olin's name earlier. He's our director of switching. So that's one I could escalate to him to find out if it's on the roadmap. And that being said, if you guys attend our roadmap webinars, it gives you a good idea of what's coming out in the future, because we're going to support a lot of things. That one I will need to check, and we'll just get back with you guys on that. And we'll answer to everyone who's attending.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. Next question, do any of the D-Link managed switches offer application visibility / profiling or QoS options?
QoS, absolutely. Even some of our lower end has QoS. Now the application, great question. Application, to get a little bit technical, that's usually a layer 7 feature, where you could say, okay, here's an application. I want to let this application through the switch, but I want to block this application to keep it from coming through the switch. So very powerful feature. That's another one we will escalate to the product manager and see if that's going to be on the roadmap. Today it's not on the roadmap. It's not in the present switch, but we'll see if it's going to be added either via firmware or down the line in future switches.
Okay, great. Next question from Eric is asking, can you show the web interface to the switch?
Oh, I can talk about the web interface. I'm not set up right now to show you the actual interface, and we have several interfaces. But the web interface, you just browse to an IP address. For ours, you browse to 10.90.90.90, and you log in using the admin for the username and password. It logs you into the switch straight away. I didn't set up a switch, but our web GUI is very straightforward. It's very straightforward. We may have a future presentation where we talk about our web interface a little bit more, but that is a more advanced topic because it has so many different options.
And what about the GUI emulator? Would that show anything?
Yeah, the GUI emulator, we have a GUI emulator for our partners. It's a great tool. The plus is it gives you a good idea, but one thing D-Link does, we do not charge to update our firmware or to use the latest firmware. You just download and use the latest firmware, and when you upgrade the firmware, that usually changes the interface a bit. It usually adds features to the switch. So it may not match what the latest and greatest firmware is. So having a live demonstration is probably the best to get the latest features.
Okay. And Eric was also asking, or is there a video available which showcases the web interface? Okay, so we kind of just talked about that.
Yeah, that's a question. I will say this. If you go to our support site, support.dlink.com, support.dlink.com. So, for example, if you type in the 1510 switch, we talked about that family a bit. That one has a few videos that shows you the interface, shows you how to upgrade firmware. It shows you different things on the switch. Same is true for some of our wireless controllers. We're still fleshing that section out, so pretty soon we'll have videos on our entire line. But right now, the 1510 has a few, the DWC 2000 and 1000, I think they have a few, but it's not completely fleshed out to include all of our line yet. But it will be. It's coming.
Okay, Seth is asking, do I need to worry about IR loss on a PoE installation?
So IR is an infrared, I wonder? IR loss? Or not sure.
Okay, we can follow up with Seth.
I's in Indigo, R's in Robert, IR loss?
Yes, R's in Robert.
Yeah, usually I'm used to that term with the cameras and the camera features. I'll bounce that one off the product manager also and see if it's a feature in the switch. Usually we don't have the IR in the switch itself, but on the cameras we address IR. But I'll bounce that off the product manager.
And Seth actually expanded on that. He said voltage/resistance.
Oh, okay. Okay, I follow that. It's on the PoE side. So yeah. I'll go back to this from the presentation, and we've had really good luck with this in the field. When the PoE does the handshake to say, okay, are you a PoE device or not, it sends that signal. Now, once it is successfully able to communicate the class to whatever the device is, no problem at all. So we usually don't have any problem with the voltage or the wattage that the device needs. Now, in practice, with some vendors' devices, two things need to be adjusted. One thing is LLDP, so sometimes that needs to be adjusted. The other thing that needs to be adjusted is the speed. So you may have to change it from a gigabit speed to a 10100 speed in order to communicate. We usually don't have trouble at all with the wattage or negotiating the power over the wire.
Okay, great. Let's see another one. Do they support port aggregation and spanning tree?
Yes, we absolutely have that in our portfolio, no problem at all. So that's a good example where you'll use the tool. So if you go to the tool, you type in AGG or something like that, it'll tell you the ones that support aggregation. If it's a specific standard you need, like 802.3 Apple X-ray, that's a certain link aggregation protocol. It will filter out and tell you the switches that support that. Usually it starts with our 1210 family line on up that supports link aggregation. It may even be in our 1100 line, but we absolutely support it. Just pick the right switch.
Okay, great. And I have a couple questions left from Eric. He's asking,
okay,
can you comment on how hard it is to stack the switches? Use a 10 gig link to link the switches.
Excellent, excellent question. Now, I'll give you, Eric, I'll give you the short answer on that. It's a piece of cake if it's like to like to like. In other words, if you're stacking the 1510 family and you have 4 of the 1510 28Ps, exact same firmware, exact same port count, not a problem. You just use the cable, you turn on the stacking, not a problem. It's a little bit tricky when you're going, for example, our DGS 3120 family that has an A version and a B version, and they have a standard image and an enhanced image. Some of them have routing, some don't, and you want to stack all those in a single stack. That's where it gets trickier. You have to follow the rules, and there's a lot of rules with that particular example. But if you have like to like, if they're the same, no problem at all. If they're a little bit different, in general, I say, well, you don't want to stack unlike to unlike. You want to stay away from that for less headache. But it is easy if they're all the same.
All right. Eric said, great. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And that's what I have for the questions. So thanks for sending questions in, everybody. All right. That's great.
Great questions.
Anything else that you want to add, Mike?
Oh, man, I wish we had more switches to give away after those excellent questions, but I appreciate you coming and give us feedback, good or bad. I apologize for the technical difficulties, but hopefully we'll have another webinar soon. And thank you so much, Carrie.
All right, yeah, thanks, Mike. We appreciate all the info, and congrats again to Chris in Mississippi. We will reach out to you on that switch, and hope to see everybody on another webinar soon. All right, thank you.
Thank you.